Hello, welcome to another Retail News Roundup with CommerceIQ. I'm CommerceIQ's head of industry insights, Tim Campbell. And today, just like every week, we have 4 articles for you to read to better understand the state of retail, the economy, and e-commerce to get a head start on your week. So without further ado, let's share what articles that we're going to be going over today. And the first one is, if you can see my screen here, the first one is from the New York Times, and it's titled "Inflation Sped Up Again in May, Dashing Hopes for Relief." As you may remember, inflation had actually decelerated a little bit in April from March, and there were thoughts that maybe we were past the peak of inflation. Well, May kind of disproved that, 8.6% compared to 8.3% rising prices in April. And, this is worrisome for a lot of reasons, right? I mean, the Fed has been kind of tracking its rate increases based off of, how inflation is doing. Of course, the Fed has already raised the rate several times. So this is probably going to mean the Fed continues to raise rates, further pressing the likelihood that the United States falls into potentially a stagflationary period, right? Where, if you reduce or increase the rates high enough, you might reduce economic output, reduce economic activity, and potentially trigger a recession while still having high prices, right? And that really is the risk here. So great overview of just what this latest news about inflation, continuing elevated inflation means for the economy, what the Fed might do about it, and also some of the drivers behind inflation, whether it's lockdowns in Shanghai or the war in Ukraine. And of course, it's not just limited to commodities and fuel, but also things like housing, rent prices. All of that, of course, is still very, very high. So good article in general. The second article here is from AP News: Facing Huge Inventory, Target Cuts Vendor Orders and Prices. This is a great article because it is so emblematic of what is happening right now in a lot of large multi-category retailers, right? And it's especially indicative of what is, I think, of the worst end of that. Which is that shoppers are changing their behavior. They're deciding that they want to buy not the same things that they bought during the pandemic. They don't want to buy, necessarily these large TVs or a ton of home decor or furniture necessarily, or apparel even. What they want to buy is essentials, groceries, and services, things like travel services or experiences. That's where Americans are spending their money. I think, higher income, middle to higher income Americans, they're still focused on services, travel, experiences, especially now that they can mostly travel much more unrestricted than they have been able to in the past. Versus maybe lower income Americans, harder hit by inflation, they're shifting more towards groceries and essentials just by necessity, right? And Target did not invest as heavily in these categories ahead of this selling period. So they had just had an oversupplied in things like decor and apparel, and now they've opted to cut orders, cut prices, sell through that as quickly as possible ahead of the key summer selling period. And Target, I think, is they have to do that a bit more aggressively than other retailers because a lot of their value proposition comes from being a trendy or popular retailer that gets ahead of trends. So they can't afford to have old merchandise or merchandise that isn't selling as quickly in the same way that maybe Walmart would be able to have that and just kind of keep it on the shelf and sell through it. The next article here is about Walmart, and that is CNBC's "Walmart launched a lot of apparel and home brands. Now that strategy will be put to the test." Walmart not feeling the pinch as much as Target, but for the past several years, Walmart has really focused on apparel on home brands to really drive its kind of branded exclusive presence. It's looking for ways of getting higher margin items beyond groceries and essentials. And one way it decided to do that was not just focusing on higher margin categories, but displaying them in kind of a treasure hunt experience, right? With maybe more space dedicated to display and presentation versus just having as many items as possible on shelves. They've remodeled several supercenters already. They plan to do up to 30 by the end of this year. But the timing is curious because at the same time they're planning this, shoppers, as I just said with Target, shoppers are shifting their spending away from these categories. So I think it's going to be interesting for Walmart if they decide to keep with this strategy, or if they decide, maybe we really need to double down on groceries and essentials right now. And maybe doing these remodels is not something that should take a top priority right now. Be cool to see exactly where Walmart ends up on this, a year from now. But on the other hand, maybe the aspiring shopper facing the threat of inflation, maybe exactly what they need is to maybe trade down a little bit, go to Walmart where they can get a cheaper deal or a less expensive deal, on trendy clothing items, for instance. Maybe Walmart could play that to their advantage. So good article, kind of giving an overview of Walmart's strategy, and I would encourage you to think about, maybe think about where Walmart will be a year from now. I think is kind of the really, really interesting question. And then the final article here is from our focus on India, which we like to include here. And that's, again, all about inflation. India's retail inflation likely slipped only modestly in May. And, inflation is not just a U.S. issue. It is faced by different countries all around the world. India, of course, is no exception. Inflation topping 7%. The only reason it actually dipped in May was because they slashed taxes on fuel and a few other things to keep down prices for shoppers. That's likely, that's kind of a one-time thing. Moving forward, it's likely to rise again. So not likely to be a source of long-term relief. And of course, the drivers of this inflation, it's not just high demand, it's also supply chain issues, right? I mean, heat waves in India, lockdowns in China for imports, the war in Ukraine driving commodity prices up. All of these things are things that can't really be undone by one country, whether it's India or the US. So I think as long as those issues persist, inflation could be a recurring threat. And fighting that threat by reducing demand is possible, but a potentially inelegant and painful solution. So again, that's really the story of the day, the week, the month, and of really the first half of this year is how effective will the Fed and central banks around the world, how effective will they be in combating inflation, and will that lead the world into recession? So good article overall, good summary of India's inflationary state. I recommend you read these if you want a good sense of what's happening in retail, e-commerce, and the economy, to get ahead of your week and understand, be better equipped for just understanding that larger space. With that being said, that wraps us up for this week. Tune in next week. We'll go over, the next 4 articles that you need to know. It's the same time every week. And that is 4:45 Eastern on Monday and 1:45 Pacific time. If you're interested in any of those articles, just check out the comments and you will see all 4 articles, the links to those articles listed there. So with that being said, I will talk to you again next week.